There we go. Sorry about that. I would like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of January 15, 2024 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Anna Murray, Councillor and Vice Chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. I would like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given, and if assistance is required, please see the Deputy Clerk. Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. Please ensure that your cell phones are turned off or on silent. And lastly, the Town of Lincoln Committee of the Whole meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. Closed captioning is available on all of our videos by selecting the closed captioning button on the bottom right of the video. Members of committee are in attendance with regrets from Councillor Pachariva, Councillor Timmers, and Councillor Bernay. We also have staff in attendance in person and remotely. Additionally, we have a resident delegation attending. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, do members have any amendments to the order of agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the statutory public meeting section of the meeting. We have one statutory public meeting this evening. The purpose of the public meeting is to receive and consider comments from the public related to the official plan review, PD-01-24. We will consider the staff report associated with the item immediately after the statutory public meeting. Committee must ensure that sufficient information and material is available to understand generally the proposal being considered, and committee must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of giving the public an opportunity to make representations regarding the proposed amendments. Personal information is collected under the authority of the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act and may be contained in an appendix to a staff report, published in the meeting agenda, delegation list, and/or the minutes of the public meeting, and made part of the public record. The Town of Lincoln collects this information in order to make informed decisions on the relevant issues and to notify interested parties of committee's decisions. Names and addresses contained in submitted correspondence and other information will be available to the public unless the individual expressly requests the town to remove their personal information. The disclosure of this information is governed by the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Our public meeting is for the purpose of the official plan review. I will ask our Director of Planning and Development to provide introductory comments. Director Bruder?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe I'll reserve my commentary because I'm about to make a presentation. So when I get up in front of everybody, I'll make sure that I provide some opening comments at that point. So whenever you'd like, I'll head up there.
All right, great. So then we'll move to delegations. We have, there's one registered delegation for this item. Please note the delegations may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Once we have received the delegation, committee will transition directly into the report and motion. Our delegation for this evening is Lynn Elliott. Lynn, please come forward.
Good evening, everyone. Page 3, purpose, para 2. A community's vision for growth and development. The official plan addresses issues such as housing, the natural environment, heritage preservation, employment needs, agriculture, commercial services, tourism, parkland recreation, servicing and transportation. The economy, affordable housing. 1341. Goal. It is the goal of this plan to support diverse and innovative economic activities with an emphasis on those related to food, farming, affordable housing and tourism, which will create jobs, attract new employers and sustain a healthy community. Affordable attainable housing is mentioned in many sections. Federal and municipal grants are available. Last week, 21.4 million federal money was given to Guelph. Affordable housing is in the 2018 official plan. With the 2 recent developments that have been before the town, the time to put the plan into action is now. Otherwise, these developments are lost to the affordable and missing middle, not the mix of housing and ownership mentioned in the plan. To address affordable housing shortages in Port Colborne announced in December 2020, the city determined Chestnut Park could be repurposed and redeveloped for a broader community benefit. Working closely with Port Cares, the city continues to explore funding options, innovative approaches and strategic partnerships to address affordable housing shortages and wait lists. I believe that the town of Lincoln is now in an excellent position to walk the walk. Page 8, Economic Prosperity in Lincoln, Para 3. Niagara Benchlands is recognised as a destination brand to support and diversify the local tourism economy. 1.1, the community vision, Para 1 last line, and ensure a high quality of life for its residents. Tourism and recreation, 1322, objectives, D, to encourage local employment so residents can work in close proximity to home. 1342, objectives, F, to develop and tourism and industries. G, to build on tourism initiatives through formation of partnerships with existing associations. H, to facilitate the provision of a full range of goods and services to meet the needs of residents and visitors. L, to actively encourage the development of additional employment. Page 10, Jordan and Jordan Station Area, Schedule A5. The industrial has been renamed employment designation to better reflect the type of use permitted in these areas. Through permitted uses and parks and open space, recreational and community facilities and public recreational purposes and special events are in the plan. From Pickleball Canada, a survey conducted in January 2020, Pickleball Canada estimated there were 350,000 pickleball players in Canada. The 2022 survey indicates a near tripling of the number of pickleball players in Canada in 2 years. This analysis is supported by anecdotal reports for demands for more facilities, instruction, organised play and competition all across Canada. Fastest growth is in ages 18 to 34, 13% playing more than 15 times a month. This age group is barely serviced by Town of Lincoln. The town's current year-round pickleball facilities is 55 plus, one court shared between 5 activities, weekdays only. The pickleball group has 87 players with 6 on the waiting list. Our convener Brad does a fantastic job with limited playing time and has had to reduce playing time for groups that have 3 sessions per week. Each session is limited to approximately 1.25 hours each, with 10 players in each group, meaning that you'll maybe play only 6 times. Fleming Centre, 12 weeks of the year and limited time courts because the arena is shared with other activities. Indoor dedicated 20 plus pickleball facility. Town of Lincoln is located in the centre of Niagara region, with a great transport network not only for local players but for Hamilton, Grimsby, Binbrook and Hagersville. All are currently going to Smithville Arena. A 20-plus court facility is Pickleball Canada's gold standard for hosting tournaments. Canadian and US players coming to Town of Lincoln will equal sports revenue and sports tourism dollars and local employment, a win-win-win. 20-plus indoor pickleball courts located in the Town of Lincoln. If purchase of BDSS goes ahead, that land, which I believe is in or close to the central business area and other interesting land, can be used, or the current town hall is exposed to QEW, and I believe it fits in the employment zone, demolition needed. This 20-plus indoor court facility can also be discussed when Jordan Lions Park rejuvenation is on the agenda. Newmarket and Aurelia have agreed to increase the number of their courts. With Newmarket, this will be 20-plus, a tournament requirement, including a dome. From Pickleball Canada, the marquee annual pickleball tournament will be held from August 20th to the 24th at the Sobeys Atlantic Tennis Centre in Bedford, Nova Scotia, on the outskirts of Halifax. Up to 41 courts. Can I continue for a couple of paragraphs?
You need to wrap it up.
Yes, that's okay. Yes. Thanks to Andrea and Amit for the info. Federal, provincial, Niagara region and Niagara tourism funding, along with sponsors like for the Fleming Centre, equals cost sharing. Students of college and university sports facilities management courses will have a local facility for their work experience. Build it and they will come, aka Smithville. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. At this,
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you very much for coming, Lynn.
Thank you.
Does anyone in committee, can you just wait for one
Yeah,
moment?
sure.
Does anyone in committee have any questions they'd like to ask of Lynn to clarify? Councillor Regima?
Thank you, Chair Murray. Can you repeat the availability that it is for the current pickleball, I'm having trouble saying this, the current pickleball
Imagine how I went
courts?
through with all that.
So you mentioned that, how often are you able to access the pickleball courts at Fleming Center as a pickleball player?
12 weeks of the year.
12 weeks of the year, and then how many, out of those 12 weeks, how many times do you get to play yourself?
Probably all 12, but that's limited to who's going to turn up. That's why we have team reach, so we can all talk to each other and see who's going to turn up. And the first 3 weeks, when the schools break...
You're speaking to the mic.
Sorry, yeah. For the first few weeks in May, until the schools break up, we can have the facility all day. Then once the schools break up, it's then for children activities. So then we don't get to play till 5, and we finish at 8 in the evening. And then Saturday and Sunday we can play 10 till 5. But that's only for 12 weeks of the year. The rest of the time we have Brad to coordinate our playing at the Lincoln Centre.
At the Lincoln Center?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you do have other options as well?
Not really.
Not really. What about outdoors? Do you ever play outdoors?
We have played outdoors. During lockdown we did, but the challenge is the weather.
Yeah.
And the courts are on the escarpment at the Angelina Prokich Park.
Yeah.
So you have wind coming in from everywhere, and it's a plastic ball with holes in it. So, it makes a challenging game, and sometimes, it's fun, but there are people who are purists and don't want to play when it's like that.
Okay, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Lynn.
Thank you.
There being no further registered delegates, are there any persons present wishing to address committee regarding the official plan review? All right, so I believe that means that, thank you to you all. The public statutory meeting is now adjourned. Sorry?
So we're here now. You can start.
Okay. So in addition to this delegation, there is written correspondence for consideration with respect to this item received from Jane Woolsey, dated January 11th, 2024, received past the deadline for inclusion on the agenda as per the Town of Lincoln's procedure bylaw. However, it has been circulated to members of committee. There being no further delegations or information for this item, I have a motion moved by Councillor Ranjima that committee receive and file for information the following delegation and written correspondence regarding the official plan review. Lynn Elliott and Jane Woolsey. I will now ask our deputy clerk to open the vote.
That vote is now open. And I'll close that vote, and that motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now move directly into report PD-01-24 regarding the official plan review. Our Director of Planning and Development will be providing a presentation. Matt, please go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening, to all members of council that are here and members, residents of the community that have joined us tonight as well. The objective tonight is to go over a little bit of a presentation, give a little bit of context, a little bit of background, and provide some level of detail with respect to the review of the official plan that we're undertaking. I think before I get into it, it's important to note this isn't a complete overhaul of an official plan, developing a new official plan. This is rather a comprehensive review and update based on a variety of factors, the changing landscape in the world of planning, which I will get into a little bit further as we go through the presentation. So next slide, please. Do I have it? Okay. There we go. So just a little bit of an agenda. Going to be going through what an actual official plan is, the overarching goals of the official plan, a little bit more on the process. Why are we looking at this now? Why are we going through this process now? Some context in terms of what we're reviewing, the actual policies of the official plan, some of the key highlights. It's a big document. There's a lot to read, so we're going to try to go through some of the key pieces. Looking at some of the overall growth trends that are in this revised official plan, again, coming from other factors as well, from higher levels of governments and the policies they're in. We'll get into that. And a little bit on next steps and how everyone can stay involved. Next slide, please. So first, we'll go into what an official plan is. So it's a comprehensive, long-term plan, an overarching plan for the entire municipality intended to implement an overall vision. It is the broadest and highest level of planning documents for a municipality that sets, again, a very broad level of policy framework that then gets implemented through further documents, secondary plans, zoning bylaws, of which we updated ours in 2022, and the like. So that's really what an official plan is. It's a very overarching document looking at a variety of factors, looking at how the municipality will grow and evolve over a longer-term planning horizon. Next slide, please. What it isn't. So a lot of times, I think, there's, because it is a policy document, there is some misconception that official plans can be prescriptive. Typically not. As I mentioned, they're the highest level, the broadest form of planning document in municipalities. So really, they stay high level. They don't often apply to specific properties, but rather set a variety of policies pertaining to different things. They were identified on the last slide: residential policies, natural environment policies, climate change adaptation policies, and look to implement widely across the municipality. They're not static, as you'll see as we go further into the presentation. They're influenced by a variety of factors. Municipalities are creatures of the province, so there is some provincial legislation guiding factors that require changes over time. There's trend analysis that requires change over time, consultation with other upper levels of government, i.e. Niagara Region, that's required changes, and that's what we'll get into in a second in terms of what's been driving this review. They also don't prevent further or future amendments to the plan. I've heard many times, well, the document's brand new. Why do you entertain any amendments at all? Well, with private property owners, they do have an opportunity, and also because these are not specific to any one piece of land, there's always an opportunity for private property owners to request consideration of an amendment to an official plan where it makes sense to implement their vision for the property, and then, of course, we analyze it and provide council with recommendations. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this now? Well, there's a variety of reasons. First and foremost, the Planning Act requires us to, recognizing that there are a variety of factors that influence an official plan that change over time. So there is, as you can see, there's intervals in which we are to review our official plan to make sure it's as most up-to-date as possible, recognizing that there's ever-changing landscape. Next slide, please. But there's a bunch of other reasons as well. Council priorities, they change over time when new terms begin. So we have to make sure that our official plan, which again is that overall guiding document that provides the vision, is consistent with council's priorities and objectives. A big one here is to align with all the provincial legislation changes. I don't want to go into too much detail on this slide, but all of you have seen over the past year and a half, 2 years, the amount of changes coming down from the province for local municipalities to administer has been very frequent, and we expect it to be ongoing. So we have to review the official plan every so often to make sure that we're capturing those changes and making sure that we're consistent with those. But really, the primary driver why this started now is because Niagara Region just recently completed their new official plan. That was adopted in November 2022, and as a lower tier municipality, we are required to undertake a conformity exercise within a year of that to ensure that we conform to our upper tier municipality's official plan. So that's been a big driver. Again, that's why this isn't exactly a new official plan. It's just being reviewed under these lenses. And finally, we're undertaking this update to make sure that we inform some of our other policy documents. There is sometimes some fallout that needs to trickle down to our other planning legislation documents that come out of something like this. So we want to make sure that we're fulsome in identifying those needs as well. Next slide, please. So just an overview here of some of the official plan policies being reviewed. I mentioned there's a wide variety implemented across the municipality. You're looking at our settlement area strategy, so we've got our set of rural area policies. That's over 2/3 of Lincoln's land mass is a rural area with various levels of agricultural protection. We have to look at that in terms of updated provincial policy and guidelines coming down from OMAFRA and other stakeholder groups at the provincial level, and then also looking at urban area policies, in particular changes that encourage more housing, changes that to the growth allocations for the region that have then been handed down to the local area municipalities. Next slide, please. And then looking at a variety of other important factors, from natural heritage features to climate adaptation and mitigation, looking at servicing and infrastructure, transportation related items, and so on. Next slide, please. So some of the key highlights, as I mentioned, and this was the subject of significant consultation, especially in front of council. We were before you as the regional official plan was being developed. That included an allocation of growth targets or growth forecasts that were included in the latest version of the provincial growth plan. That was in, I believe, 2020. They handed down a growth forecast to Niagara Region. Niagara Region then consulted with all of the lower tier municipalities to really ground truth what all of them were seeing, what the trends were, making sure that we capture what the accurate forecast could be. The planning horizon at the provincial level is out to 2051. In order to be consistent with that, we have to do the same, recognizing, again, there needs to be some inherent flexibility. That's a long time to plan outwards, but that is the horizon in which the growth forecasts are identified. So we needed to reconcile that based on all that work that happened when Niagara Region updated their official plan. Again, I mentioned with just general growth plan policies, provincial policies in general are encouraging more forms of housing. We're in a period where the provincial government has stated that there's a need not only a number of housing, but housing options, housing choices, variation. So making sure that we review the policy framework we have in our official plan to reflect that guidance. Looking at housing affordability, this is always something that's an ongoing item to consider. It changes over time as well as housing needs shifts, housing prices shift, the market shifts, and we need to be cognizant of that as we consider housing affordability. A big one was we have our GO Transit secondary plan area where a future GO station is contemplated. That has been identified as a protected major transit station area by the region in the regional official plan, and as such, a strategic growth area. And really what that means is that's to encourage transit and ridership in that given area. This is an area before this even was envisioned. It was always thought of as an area of intensification opportunity. So this realizes that, and what it requires is that us, the lower tier municipality, assign a minimum growth target to that. So we've had to make sure that we update our official plan accordingly. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of insight into the breakdown of housing currently in the town. You can see on the left there in 2021, a vast majority of our housing stock in Lincoln is of the low-density variety to semi-single detached dwellings, things like that. A small amount being medium density. Now you're getting into your townhouses and different variations of those. And then an even smaller amount being higher density uses, such as apartment-style land uses. Going forward, as we project out to 2051, looking at what the growth allocations are and trying to equalize some of the housing stock and options that are available, you can see the projection is a little more of an even split between low and high density. Now, high density is something that's encouraged by provincial policy, generally speaking, just because there is an ongoing need to maximize efficient use of land. It's even more important in the town because we don't have that much available urban land. So what the province is saying is that, well, you need to plan, to 2051 and make sure that you're efficiently utilizing the land that the town currently has, because otherwise you have to look at other options to accommodate growth, which could include, any potential spill outside of urban areas. And we've seen very clearly recent direction from the province indicating that that's not an option, as there's been a lot of reversal in looking at greenbelt protections and allowing any type of residential development in those areas. So just a little bit of a visual just to show current and future breakdown of what the housing stock could look like. Next slide, please. So this is something, and council can keep an eye out for it, because staff are likely going to be providing a little bit more of a presentation specific to this in the future. But it is one of the appendices of the document of the staff report on the agenda, where we talk a little bit about population and housing. And staff just wanted to pull out a few key points as they're important to consider when we look at the overall growth forecast for the town. So when we look back at the previous 5 years, going from 2016 to 2021, we saw there that there was a trend where we were exceeding what the growth targets were. And, for some people, they think, well, geez, that's more growth happening than what we had planned for. Well, that's something moving forward when we discussed the growth targets with the region that we wanted to avoid, and only because it's important from an infrastructure investment perspective that we try to reconcile and be as close as possible to what the forecasts are. So we make sure that we're planning for growth and we're allocating sufficient resources and planning for those strategically and long-term to accommodate that growth. So you can see the trends were that we've been growing at a fairly steady pace. Obviously, in the past couple years, or the past year and a half or so, a little bit slower due to market conditions and higher interest rates, but that's considered only temporary. When we look at, and I heard this, we had a public open house, and some of the commentary was around, well, what's Lincoln's share of the growth overall in Niagara region? Are we now taking on a larger share? Should we be? So I wanted to provide a little bit of insight there as well. You can see in the second point there that there's really the big three municipalities in the region that comprise over half of the share of total growth in Niagara region. And those are the usual suspects that you would consider. When you look at Lincoln's share of regional growth, it's approximately, you'll see they're just a little over 9%. And if you look further at what our population is in 2021, the population was 26,860. That represented a 5.5% share approximately of the region's total population. And with this forecasted growth for the region as the whole, this is anticipated to slightly increase to 6.6% share of the Niagara region's population in 2051. So not a significant departure, just a little over a percent. But that really is just part and parcel of the town being a desirable place to live, and we anticipate that to continue. Also of note, when we're looking at housing trends over time, when we look at the average age in the previous census data, which was, I believe, around 37, and now we're well over 40 in the latest census counts, what that indicates is that we have a little bit of an older population compared to the average of other Ontario municipalities. And we can see that average age is creeping up. And why that's important is, again, that speaks again to diversifying housing stock. As individuals age, we want them to be able to age in place when they look at things like downsizing opportunities and those types of things, making sure that the housing stock in Lincoln's able to accommodate that in the future. So that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a little bit of a shift in what the housing stock will be. Next slide, please. So I mentioned this already, what our housing stock currently consists of. And again, the provincial policy direction to vary that and provide a little bit more diversity across that spectrum. When I look at the increased residential growth that's forecasted over the 30-year planning period, it would equate to an average of about 327 new residential units each year. And I just wanted to make that highlight that, because currently we're on pace, as we have been for the past number of years, longer than the past 5 years, around 292 average. Now, that goes up and down. Obviously, last year, we didn't achieve that. This year, we might not as well, but over time, as it works itself out. So you can see there's not a significant increase over and above what we've already been experiencing. Another thing to note is that a lot of the growth just in Niagara region, really in Canada as a whole, is being driven largely by immigration. That's 96% of all increase in population, and that's expected to continue because in the final quarters of last year, we were seeing growth, population growth. Again, this is in the larger scale, but that hadn't been seen since the 50s. So significant amount of growth that is currently happening. And again, it's one of those things where, as a municipality, we need to make sure that we look at what could happen in our specific area versus what can happen in the larger area and make sure that we're prepared for it. Next slide, please. So when looking at where it could happen in the town, we have a few areas now that are called greenfield areas. Now, most of them are spoken for in terms of what the future will hold. They are contemplated for development, but what greenfield areas are is they're essentially that, they're vacant lands. When you look at how growth is forecasted, you're either looking at greenfield areas and how they can accommodate growth, or the rest of the built-up area, and therefore being developed or growing through intensification, which is redevelopment of lands that have already got some type of land use on them. So really, those specific areas that we see a significant amount of density increases, and we've been saying this for a while, are the Prudhome's urban area, the Beamsville GO transit station area, and generally speaking, the Beamsville urban area, but more along the Ontario Street corridor, which has been long identified as an intensification corridor, with other forms of intensification kind of happening throughout at various locations based on the site-specific circumstances of those properties. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit of a visual showing what the population forecast and annual growth rates look like for the municipalities in Niagara. You can see, if you look at it, West Lincoln, what their existing 2021 population is in blue versus their 2051 population. They're going to experience a fairly significant jump proportionately. Then you've got Niagara Falls and St. Catharines and Welland, all with significant amounts of growth. We're trending very similar to Thorold at the moment, a little bit behind these other places in terms of numbers we're going to be seeing, but nevertheless seeing a significant amount of growth over the planning horizon. Next slide, please. So just going to some other key highlights, some of the other updates that are proposed in the official plan based on the factors that I previously mentioned. Looking at updated employment land policies, we're seeing, especially around our GO area, generally speaking, there's now an opportunity, they're called office commercial areas. There is a potential for a mixture of employment and non-employment. Well, we want to make sure that we maintain a consistent number of jobs, taking the number of 45 jobs per hectare. That's coming straight out of the Niagara Region official plan targets. So we want to make sure we're specific in that regard to maintain a level of employment opportunities. And the update and verbiage from industrial to employment, that recognizes that there's a bunch of different employment opportunities. You've got your traditional, yes, industrial type jobs, but you've also got your population related jobs, your commercial and your retail jobs too, that play a significant role. And then further opportunity for employment too, outside of the urban areas and the rural areas as a result of our local agricultural economy. So on the agricultural side of things, there still maintains a focus on preservation of agricultural lands as we're required by provincial policy. Like I said, largely protected by Greenbelt and Niagara Escarpment Plan protections in our land base, but also recognizing that the province has introduced some more flexibility for some other diversified agricultural uses. So making sure that we're recognizing the opportunities for those as well. Next slide, please. So we hear a lot more about climate change in terms of adaptation, but also mitigation as well. And what's been done is, instead of having little bits and pieces of associated verbiage in different areas of the official plan we've consolidated, similarly to what the region has in their official plan, to have its own section to give it a little more clarity, a little more prominence, and help with application. So we've pulled that out and made its own section. And then you can see we've updated a variety of associated environmental, parks and recreation, and green energy infrastructure policies. And then, of course, there's been some updates to not just natural environment mapping, but a variety of mapping as a whole in consultation with Niagara Region, Niagara Escarpment Plan Commission, and a few other stakeholders. Next slide, please. Finally, again, all of those pieces of provincial legislation have required us to look at some of our parts of our official plan that guide the administration of certain things. Planning applications, I've mentioned before, we've had to revamp our pre-consultation approach because Bill 109 has included much quicker timelines for us to process planning applications. So we've had to shift things around, make sure that we're more diligent and exhaustive up front when we evaluate planning applications to make sure they've got everything that they require in the submission, and also to undertake some early consultation with the community in advance of the application process actually starting, recognizing we don't have as much time. So looking at those things, site plan control has been altered by Bill 23 in terms of the amount of, now there's a threshold and number of units that we can apply site plan control to, nothing less than 10. So we've had to make changes like that. Reduced opportunity for us to look at urban design and landscaping in our site plan reviews. But again, we've still kept a lot of those policy principles in the official plan because we still feel they're important. And, we still look to make sure that we consider those even notwithstanding some of these provincial legislation changes. We also have things like our Ontario Streetscape and Visioning Design and Master Plan that guide those discussions. And then finally, too, we've got some updated policy language because there's been increased permissions allocated by the province to allow for more accessory dwelling unit provisions, including out in prime agricultural lands in certain circumstances. So we've been required to make those changes. Next slide, please. You'll recall the Prudhome's area went through a concept update, and there were changes to that plan. Some of the mapping associated with that we've had to update in here to go through a little bit of a conformity exercise after that process. We had identified at the time that this would be happening, so this is just making sure that we complete that process. And then, as I mentioned, some mapping changes as well associated with the new regional official plan in our zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. So this is where we're at. There's been a public open house that we've had. We've ensured that we've made a survey available. We've got a Speak Up Lincoln page. Our survey, we've been getting a lot of responses lately. I think we're up well over 40 now. We've had 550 visits to our Speak Up Lincoln page. So it's getting a lot of attention. We're getting a lot of input, including right around now. As we move forward, in recognition of that, in recognition that we want to make sure that we provide a fulsome summary, we're probably going to be having another touch point or another meeting in front of all of you before we even come for a recommendation. We want to make sure we're fulsome in identifying and considering all the input that we receive. And again, we're continuing to receive it now. There will likely also be another public open house as well mixed in there. Next slide, please. So finally, just again, reiterating how important feedback is. We have been receiving a significant amount and hope that continues. And we will make sure that we consider and provide updates accordingly. Next slide, please. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Director Bruder. Do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor Ranjima?
Thank you, Chair Murray. I'm not certain, but I think it's the City of Niagara Falls recently through its official plan states that certain, if not all, residential applications must demonstrate in their planning reports from the applicant how they're meeting the city's housing targets, and more specifically, how they're meeting affordable housing targets? Are we doing that? And if not, do you recommend requiring this, and would it be through the policies of the official plan?
Through you, Madam Chair. That's a good question, Councillor. I think when you look at, an explanation of how they're meeting our housing targets, again, Niagara Falls being a bigger municipality, associated housing targets, we've looked at the development we have in the pipeline, and we are of the opinion that the housing target, that the one that's included in the official plan will be met. I think it's more important, though, and something that we are considering is how we work in the affordable housing piece. We don't necessarily have a hard and fast target per se, although the region has provided some input that we are considering with respect to a percentage of new development being associated with affordable housing. So we're working with them on that as well, and likely looking to include something similar, as I know that was their input to date.
So a question of clarification, Madam Chair. So that's something that we're looking to, we would put that right into the official plan, is that right? That we would require that each development application meet certain targets, and I was really referring to affordable housing. Thank you for that.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, not necessarily every specific development, but I think looking at the whole, the region has in their official plan, and Melissa, you can nod at me if I'm correct, I think it's 20%. Yeah, that's what the Niagara region's stipulation is of development include an affordable housing component. Not just one, but on the whole.
Okay, so further clarification, if I was a developer coming in with an application, what would the conversation look like? Let's say I wanted to build 300 units within the urban area. What would the conversation look like?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, that's one of the questions we still have in looking to implement something like this, because it is relatively new. It's not something that I see in a lot of the other official plans of the lower tier municipalities in Niagara, so looking for a little bit more guidance and conversation with the region. That's one of the things that we want to come back to you with a little bit of an update on as well, because we haven't quite gotten to that point through discussions with the region to date, but it is something that they have flagged.
Okay, I think Niagara Falls has done something like that. Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Russell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Bruder. A couple questions on infrastructure. The first being, again, you may be able to provide some insight into this, but again, we see and feel and hear about issues with infrastructure, not necessarily within Lincoln, sometimes within Lincoln, but around Lincoln, in particular QEW. How do these official plans coming together, the regional plan coming together, influence provincial planning on major infrastructure improvements? Any idea of how that transpires?
Through you, Madam Chair, Councillor, are you talking about things like the QEW itself in terms of, okay.
Yeah, like provincial assets, like QEW widening, the north-south cut through the Niagara region, that type of thing.
Yeah, so first and foremost, when the growth plan is developed, that's a provincial document, with the Ministry of Transportation being a provincial entity as well. They're involved in that process, and they know where the allocations are going, roughly speaking. They don't necessarily see the end product in terms of where they go down to some of the lower tier municipalities, but that's why processes such as the Niagara Region official plan that was done, and then our own official plan, Ministry of Transportation, that's just one example, but they're involved in each of those. So while they don't necessarily, we don't shape those things, we do provide the insight in terms of, okay, here's where things are happening, and we look to the Ministry of Transportation to ensure that they're providing guidance and have an opportunity to provide their input as well. So they're involved in the process that way. So in terms of shaping how upgrades to those types of larger infrastructure items happen, it's through involvement. But again, it's not something that we would necessarily say, okay, this is what you need to do. It's just kind of giving them the information and then trying to work through it that way.
Yeah, thank you. Follow up to you, Madam Chair. So with that in mind, again, do you think it's, again, we're feeling the pressure already, especially with the QEW, with migration of people going to and from work and through tourism on weekends, it gets backed up early and a lot and often. Would there be any benefit to advocating for it directly, either in the OP or up to other levels of government to try to start moving that forward as much as possible?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think it's always good. We always try to advocate, if I take something like Prudence, for example, we've tried to advocate for involvement of these agencies earlier on in the process rather than later. Historically, there was often a trend that, significant input wouldn't be provided until you're fairly far down the line and ready to go in detailed design, but recognizing that there needs to be input a lot earlier. That's something we've already been advocating for, but again, I don't think it hurts for any further advocating on that part. No, I think it'd be fine.
Thank you. And last question, concerning Lincoln's internal infrastructure. Again, I know we've looked at a lot of these big projects, Prudhome's in particular, some within our urban area, and how they're going to put pressure on our existing infrastructure. Do you foresee that as we start attaining some of these growth targets, that as they build out, that cost is going to cover those infrastructure requirements that are going to be needed to bring those online?
Through you, Madam Chair, generally speaking, that's something, again, why we're trying to be as accurate and proactive as possible is to make sure that we do our best to make sure that happens. Ultimately speaking, again, I think it's something that needs to be revisited over time as well. That's why we have to review these documents every so on, and every time these stakeholder groups, these provincial entities, what have you, are involved. So, I would say, overall, I'm confident that there's going to be an opportunity to make sure that they're properly dealt with from a funding perspective, so.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Reimer?
Thank you, Chair Murray. Through you to Matt. Thanks, Matt, for providing us with lots of holiday reading material. I'll forget how many pages there were, but it filled up a few days. 317, there you are. Great report, lots of stuff in there. I'm going to go to page 5 of your report that you, in our agenda here, Managing Growth in Lincoln. And you touched on quite a bit of it in your report here this evening, too. Basically has to do with the intensification, the built-up areas, and that 90% of our growth, somewhere I read that 90% of our growth is going to come through redevelopment and through sort of existing piece of land, not like like Mississauga at one time would just, kind of go from road to road to road and kind of had a blank sheet. We have to kind of adapt to existing spaces. And I just find that when we're dealing with those applications, so an application comes through a developer for a building to be built or for a project, that they're always, they're quite often they're up against existing forms of housing. And I find the language a lot of time, especially in the provincial policy and the regional policy, is pretty vague. And so one person can take a look through one lens and look at that development and say, that looks great. And the next person looks through that development through another lens and says, that looks terrible. And I asked that question, is it possible to have something that is more definitive or descriptive, or does the provincial influence override that? Is this the policy? I know there's probably a lot of questions there. Sorry, Chair Murray. Is this the policy to do it? Is it possible in this official plan, or is it something else we need to look at? Just for your input on this.
Through you, Madam Chair, it's a really good question, because it's one that I think a lot of municipalities are struggling with. Because again, you do have, in some cases, some of the language that's coming down from the recent provincial legislation updates, they take a little bit of importance or even of ability away from municipalities to look at things like compatibility, to look at things like architectural consistency, and things like that. So on one hand, you do have that, but at the same time, we have some other tools that we've been developing, again, a little bit more specific to certain areas, like we've got the visioning study on Ontario Street that we've looked at. We've got, we were talking about it before the break, we're going to try to look at some policies for King Street in Beamsville as well from a Heritage Conservation District standpoint. There's still tools available to an extent, but the official plan, again, usually pretty broad. You have some general principles in terms of looking at transition, looking at compatibility, and outlining when and how to look at it. But then you've got some other things like those, and even also our zoning bylaw in terms of setting some of the more specific requirements, some of the step backs and things. Again, it depends, because anybody at any time can come forward to amend these things, and it needs to be considered, and it needs to be considered consistently with provincial policy. But it is a little bit of a balance. It's something that we consider, again, at a higher level in this document, and then try to drill down in some of those other documents that I mentioned.
One more question, if I may, Councillor Chair Murray. In the last, just as an example, the last public meeting we had regarding a development on Hickson, if you take a look at that, this question is related to what we just talked about, Matt. If you take a look at that on Niagara Navigator, or something that shows a bigger area, you can see the lot sizes, the existing building lot sizes from the old part of Hickson, they're one size, and the southern part of Hickson's another size, and then Cherrywood's a little bit smaller, and then Ashby gets a little bit smaller, and Cachet, the lots, single-family dwellings are even a little smaller. And so in this definition where we have of low, medium, and high density, where does that come to? There's sort of 5 different time frames in that one little snapshot, right? And now we're dealing with that infill piece, and that's, you can look around the different towns we have. We're gonna face that everywhere. That definition is there somewhere? How small does that low density single family, get, or is there a point where those definitions change and the question is the same? Is this where do we change that, or is that something that is out of our hands, or how do we deal with that? Through you, Chair Murray, to Mr. Bruder.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. When you look at our, the low, medium, and high density ranges, there is a range of density, and it's a calculation, right? Area versus how many dwellings are on that area of specific land. So there's that calculation. There's a range provided. We adjusted some of those, but we kept kind of the lower and medium density ranges similar. But on compatibility, generally speaking, I think it's changed a little bit in terms of how it's reviewed. You mentioned, there's bigger lots versus smaller lots. I think that's a struggle for a lot of people, essentially, because you look at those and you say, well, they're different. It says, well, yeah, but from a built form perspective, if it's a similar type of dwelling, and again, there's been plenty of situations where you have single detached dwellings and townhouses, much smaller lots, a little bit of a different built form. Are they considered compatible? In many instances, yes, they are. So again, I think there's a little bit of a separation between what some individuals might find as compatible and what, again, the legislation framework that we have before us consider compatible. But what we try to do is reconcile as best we can and come up with a product that is often a little bit of a compromise of the both, wherever we can. But again, looking at the density ranges, are we adjusting them? We adjusted our upper end of our higher density range. Just again, looking at trends, we wanted to make it consistent, not only with provincial policy direction, but even some of the comparators. For instance, that one's very similar to Pelham, what they do, and they have a lot less development going on than we do currently. So trying to look at it through those lenses as well. But from a compatibility point of view, it's gotten a little more complex than just looking at the lot sizes and even, if it's exactly like for like dwelling style. So hard, but we do our best to find that balance.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Chair Murray.
Thank you. Councillor Miklick?
Thank you, Chair Murray, through you to Matt. Thank you and your staff for going through this and taking care of this and working on this. Like Councillor Reimer, it is a lot to process and a lot to go through, and just to read through it, never mind actually process it and make changes that you're proposing. Couple questions I have. They're similar, I think, in nature to Councillor Reimer's. And, like we look at compatibility and we look at character and this sort of thing. And I look at, one of the points in, like, it's subsection F, to enhance the character and stability of existing and well-established residential neighborhoods by ensuring that development and redevelopment is consistent with and or provides appropriate transition to existing development. And then G is to protect stable residential neighborhoods by directing higher density development to the CBD and intensification areas within the built-up area. How are we determining this? Who who's determining what is appropriate or what the character of a neighborhood is? It seems like when we are, or residents are trying to protect a neighborhood or, maintain the character of a neighborhood, there's this thought, well, the province is going to supersede us. Whatever we say, whatever we do, we're going to go to OLT and we're going to lose. And who's determining that? Where's the definitions of all of this that are more in line with a province, a region, and a municipality? And not just for us, but for all municipalities. Because similar to where Councillor Reimer was going, yes, what you were mentioning was, lot sizes, we don't have 120-foot lots anymore being proposed. But on those 120-foot lots, you were able to park 3 cars in front of that house or unit. We're calling them units now. We're not even calling them homes. We're not even calling them houses. We're calling them units. And it just seems so, we lose the character of a subdivision by not even calling these units homes anymore. So could you tell me, where's the problem? Who's determining that? How's that being decided?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's a complex consideration for sure. So we do have, again, I'll start with the province. They have mandates, and I don't want to rehash over and over again for you, but in terms of what housing stock we need to achieve, how we vary those. And, there is direction where you want to provide some variation in housing stock within a community as well as in the broader context of the whole town. So there's inherent need for flexibility that's handed down from the province in terms of how we do that. Looking at different housing options, looking at different building stock you mentioned. I won't refer to them as units, but apartment dwellings, we'll call them dwellings. And then single dwellings and townhouse dwellings. Is there an opportunity to have all of them coexist in a neighborhood where, maybe there is a maintenance of character? I think in certain circumstances there can be. Our job at the local level is to consider all those higher order planning documents that come from the higher levels of government, how they've shaped our documents, and then look at our documents in terms of, okay, this is the benchmark of where we need to start this dialogue. And a lot of times, again, using that and then considering what a prospective developer wants. These are tools for us. You mentioned, if we go to the board or the tribunal for a third-party appeal, we might lose. That's true, sometimes, depending. So our goal is to arrive at the best compromise we have, and making sure while we're doing that, we're identifying what the key character elements of a given neighborhood are. But again, I think just because there's a building with a little bit more height than its surroundings, or again, a little bit of a different built form than what maybe you see in the broader context, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a complete detraction of the character. I think there's also a lot of variation between what people consider character is of a given neighborhood. They might see it differently than others. There's probably variation among planners. There's variation among residents. And again, we try to take in all input we get from all different angles, look at what the parameters are of our decision-making capability, and come forward with the best solution based on that.
So a follow-up to that question, just so through you, Chair, would it make sense to put more appropriate or more stronger wording with more bite or teeth to our OP to give it more strength, or is that possible?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think, again, when you look at our document, I would venture to say there's probably already some things included in there where we are pushing the envelope a little bit. I had this conversation earlier with staff, but when I look at things like those density ranges, yes, we did look at the higher density range, but otherwise we tried to keep things relatively the same, knowing that there is that toing and froing. There's often a specific property owner that wants to make adjustments, and again, we have to make sure that we're looking at where the province wants to go ultimately, and we're achieving that to make our position defensible, but at the same time taking into account local context, in some cases providing an avenue for the community to get involved rather than having everything, as of right, or everything, already spelled out in terms of being too flexible. So we're trying to be in between in that sweet spot, and that's really been the goal. But I think if we push the envelope too far, we open ourselves up to other challenges with this document.
Okay, thank you. And then another question, if I could. Another area that I was going to bring up was Ontario Street and the protected mass transit area, mass transit system area. And I feel like in our last OP and this one now, like we put a lot of weight and we put a lot of strength in the GO Transit area. And this GO Transit area had to go through a business case. We had to have a willing partner or a developer that was part of that. And we're making a lot of decisions. We're making a lot of policy based on that. And the question I have is, what happens, what strength do we have, or what happens if one day the developer of that said property decides, no, you know what, change of direction, we're planning on doing something else with this property now. And here we are, we're making all these policy, we're making all these plans, planning forecasts and futures and decisions based on that. But is there feet to the fire to ensure that those lands are earmarked for a proposed GO station?
Through you, Madam Chair, in terms of feet to the fire, for us, there has been, because provincially and regionally, that's what it's recognized as currently. And that conclusion has been come to through significant amount of dialogue, collaboration, consultation with said property owner, because that is what the vision is, and that's something that they've been on board with. So, you know, we do have an obligation based on those higher order policies to ensure that we reflect the same. Now, is there an opportunity for things to change eventually and, you know, in the longer term? I can't say that there isn't. But what I can say is, first of all, we've always looked at that area as a town, even before I was here, as an area of potential for significant amount of growth and intensification to accommodate it there. For obvious reasons, from a transitional standpoint, it offers a little bit of a better opportunity than other areas in town. So I think having that area earmarked for growth is a positive regardless. But, you know, we're looking at our review of our official plan now in the context of a lot of policy changes. We expect those to continue. And we're going to have to review our official plan over and over again, probably in certain intervals. We're required to do so anyway, so there's going to be opportunities and flexibility later on down the line, because just because we've got that area earmarked doesn't necessarily mean all the growth is going to flock to that area in a few years. We're going to see all of it. It's going to take a little bit longer, and I think through those opportunities for future review, we can be a little bit more nimble if we have to, but all signs now indicate that, you know, this is the vision and this is the long-term strategy that we need to adhere to.
Thank you. And I think, like, and again, I'm not an expert at this. I'm just, you know, reading this and I'm just processing this. And I'm thinking that, you know, perhaps like there might be a case for Plan B, because it's not the province that will be building the GO station, more or less. They'll be in partnership. So in the past, I believe GO stations, they would acquire the properties and they would assemble and they would build. And here we are now with this new business model where we're reliant on the private sector to have skin in the game. So that's where I'm concerned about when it comes to the OP that we're creating for the next 5 or 10 years. And then my third and final question. What? Okay.
Sorry, Councillor. I've noticed that our CAO has come up. CAO, did you want to add anything to this?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't. I think Director Bruder answered the question relative to GO Transit. The only thing I'd probably add to that is that we have GO bus service currently in the community, and I know we've spoken with said developer who's developing that particular property. And so an expansion of that service is ultimately probably some sort of fallback, but we'll be in front of council in the coming months talking to you a little bit more about GO and a little bit more about the plans that the developer has for that particular area.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Bruder, having just finished, almost just finished, the regional official plan, which took the better part of a year to complete, I'm interested to know now, there was one piece of that official plan it became very, very significant throughout the process, and that was the issue of connectivity. And there were several, I think the really beneficial part of it, Madam Chair, was that the members of the community that were really keen on ensuring that there was connectivity really guided council in terms of some of the language. And that was really helpful, and it was, I think, very successful. So how much should we assume that's in the regional plan will be carried over into and applied to Lincoln?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the Mayor. Mayor Easton, there's going to be a significant amount carried over. As you know, the region developed their complete streets design framework, which includes road cross-sections that contribute to or lend themselves to enhanced connectivity throughout the region, looking at different cross-sections, what's needed to be achieved from a connectivity standpoint. That needs to be reflected in our policy. We have an active transportation master plan too that's going to coincide with that. There's also regional mapping in their official plans showing the interconnectivity throughout the region for the various local municipalities to connect to each other where feasible from an active transportation standpoint. So all that stuff is being reviewed as well and is going to be incorporated into our document too.
And as a part of this question, Madam Chair, in the document, it speaks to an involvement that, and it appears as though the NEC is asking to be involved in a different way. I didn't see that when the official plan, when the Niagara Region official plan was coming through. And maybe I just missed it. It was thousands and thousands of pages. But what are they asking for? Because they're not the speediest. And so if you're talking about bureaucracy, then I want to understand better what their involvement, what they intend to have as a change in involvement, if that's what they're asking for.
Through you, Madam Chair. They're asking for a little more involvement just upfront with lands. So right now, obviously, there's lands that are designated under the Niagara Escarpment Plan area that are outside of our urban areas. And in those areas, our policy documents don't apply. The Niagara Escarpment Plan legislation, provincial legislation applies. But there's areas of transition, right? There's areas that abut those areas. I think they want to be a little bit more involved in those in earlier stages at pre-consultations. They want some of their policy language reflected a little bit more than in the past. In the past, we would just make general references to their documentation, to their policy language, but they want a little more incorporation into our official plan, using a little bit more of their verbiage. We haven't completed our review yet in terms of where that makes the most sense, because in certain areas, again, our zoning, our official plan don't apply in their areas and in their rural areas. And as such, you know, the opportunity for that's a little bit limited, but staff are reviewing their comments. And if there's an opportunity to address those, we will, but we want to minimize confusion as well because there's that distinction, right? So something that's ongoing, but that's generally in a nutshell what they're asking for.
Okay, there was, Madam Chair, I believe there was a period of time when there was, there were reviews being done of the MPCA Act, the Escarpment Act, and the planning, our planning documents that we were working on at the time. And so was that compatibility not all sorted out at the time?
Through you, Madam Chair, it seemed like it was at the time. So these comments were a little bit more fulsome than we anticipated for our official plan. Generally speaking, a lot of the commentary, and I've seen it elsewhere, is just that, you know, there's the official plan and then there's the Niagara Escarpment Plan. So seeing this level of integration requested is a little bit new and something, again, we're going to continue to discuss with them. But we never really had issue with that in the past. to your point, your worship.
No, because we were in charge.
Correct.
So, Madam Chair, I guess what I could ask Mr. Bruder is to make sure that we clearly understand what the relationship is going to be. And I bring this up because we know now what our relationship is with the NPCA. And we know exactly what it is. And we know what tools we would use to enhance that relationship. If the NEC is looking for something different, then I hope that we will be able to develop a very clear document on relationship, and I'll leave it at that. Green energy, you've described it really thoroughly in here, and I think it's very, very helpful. However, green energy, low-impact development techniques, it's so disappointing that they still are really, they'll only happen if there's incentives. You don't say that in the document, but we know, council knows that, because we're not seeing these coming forward in very few cases. Do we see them coming forward? But we do know that there's a lot of requests for incentives. This is really the trend. This should be where we're going. What are we going to have to do? And is there anything that we can put into this plan that would really help motivate that beyond having to look for money for incentives?
Through you, Madam Chair, I mean, it is true, depending on the type of green energy or low-impact development that you're speaking about, it can be a little bit cost prohibitive to implement for certain developers. But really what we're looking at is making sure that an appropriate range is considered. Maybe it doesn't have to all be big-ticket items such as those. We've also, as I mentioned, dedicated an entire section now in our official plan to climate change adaptation and mitigation. So pulling that out and adding a lot of prominence to it via the wording that we've included in there. At the end of the day, it's not something that I've seen widely, regulated in terms of thou must, but we're adding a lot stronger guidance wording in our documents. So hoping that stimulates a little bit more consideration. But again, reference to our climate change adaptation plan too, and some of our policies now that are our design standards that have been updated to consider low-impact development a little more thoroughly. All those things together, making it a little easier to reference. We're hoping for an improved uptake.
Okay, that's encouraging. Madam Chair, my final question then relates to I suppose, the principles around being a bedroom community. So my question to you, Matt, would be, do you consider us to be a bedroom community, or should we understand that we're a bedroom community? How would you interpret that for council and the community?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's something that I definitely consider very carefully. I was looking at just general employment numbers for the town as this was all occurring, just looking at latest census information, looking at the amount we contribute to the workforce, generally speaking, a little over 13,000 individuals in the town, of which currently I think there's a little under 12,000 of those that are employed, actively employed. And then I tried to look at, okay, who works in here in the town, who leaves the town. Unfortunately, I don't have information of individuals that are outside the town coming here to work. I assume there are a significant amount, but again, I don't know. But just looking at the numbers, significant amount work from home in the town. There's another significant amount, more than, when I look at it altogether, there's less than half that commute elsewhere. So there are employment opportunities here, trying to diversify, again, avoiding that bedroom community where it's just basically only a sleepy residential area. That's not something we want to work towards. You've heard me speak about it at length, all of you have, about, trying to establish as many elements of a complete community that we can in all our various areas of growth and even outside of those. So we're working to achieve that. That's why we included some more teeth to our employment area policies, adding a little more protections for employment opportunities in those. So again, looking at those numbers, I wouldn't say we're a bedroom community, and through some of our updates to these policies, we're trying to avoid that scenario in the future. And I think we can.
Great, thanks for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mayor Easton. Our next speaker is Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. back to Director Bruder. Two questions. One, you mentioned, I think, in response to Councillor Mikulik, that, again, we could get in trouble if we get too prescriptive with a document, potentially. And I know, again, I think our CAO has mentioned a couple of times that in 2016, when the OP was originally put through, it was challenged by the province. Could you just give a little insight into what that process is when a document does get challenged?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. It's the same principle as if a development would get appealed, where, you know, there's a challenge ostensibly if we're a little bit too prescriptive or we're a little bit, we're not in line with provincial policy. It could come from the province. In extreme cases, it could come from a prospective developer. It could come from anybody, and the way that would work is the same as any other appeal, whereby that appeal would be weighed against the warrants based on largely what provincial policy direction are. So I wouldn't call it trouble. It wouldn't, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that it would happen, but again, our responsibility, even notwithstanding that, is to consider all the provincial policy, some of which I know is not always the most popular, but at the end of the day, that's who we're creatures of. So it's incumbent on us, and it's most defensible where we do incorporate that to the greatest we can, obviously trying to achieve a balance. But the appeal process would happen that way where, you know, largely there would be some local area policy considered, but then how it got there, it would always go back to the provincial overarching framework. And if there was, you know, considered warrant for an appeal based on that, we're not adhering, then there would be a compelling argument that could likely be made at a hearing with respect to whatever policy is in question.
Thank you. And follow-up, or second question, I guess would be. So with that in mind, and this goes back to Councillor Rinchema's question about attainable / affordable housing and how we can start mitigating that a little bit further. Is there anything that we can do in the OP, or maybe it's a zoning bylaw, to be restrictive enough to give us leverage or more leverage in the negotiations with future developers to get attainable housing or to get green energy aspects to the builds? Or is it something that would fall in an OP?
Through you, Madam Chair. I mean, it's something that we do continue to look at. It's a little bit of a tricky one. I mentioned before what the region has in their official plan in terms of a threshold of the overall development and an affordability percentage. That would in of itself, depending on how the language is structured in our official plan, add a little bit of teeth. But again, the problem that I foresee there is it's hard to pin it down on any one particular development. We'd just be trying to achieve that on the whole. So we'd likely need to come up with some type of parallel strategy, which again, you know, we've got our Housing Select Committee that's providing information generally on trends on how other municipalities are dealing with that, what the numbers are, what our actual core housing need here is in Lincoln, that we can build off of. So again, I think it warrants further discussions, but at the end of the day, can we include mandates in our official plan? It's not something that I've seen widely implemented. You do have an opportunity, or there has been in other areas, things like inclusionary zoning. But the problem is, a lot of times with that, you know, you need to base it off something. So that's why we need all this other work and a strategy to be further formalized as well. So I think there is an opportunity for further refinement, but again, it's going to take a little bit more of us looking into it. And again, we're hoping to flush it out a little bit more with regional staff as well.
Okay. And so just to clarify, so more attention to it, would that be in the OP or in zoning bylaws?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would probably say more, we could accomplish it in the OP.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Rinchema?
Thank you, Chair Murray. So my question is, you know, recently there, as you said earlier on, there's been a lot of legislation coming from the province and changes. And in some cases, the province recently has backed away from some of the legislation that it's brought forward that was related to quote-unquote more housing based on the principle of getting more housing in the province. So to what extent does some of that shifting back and forth suggest to us that the decision regarding density, so number of units within our municipality, is more in our hands than we may have thought, for example, 6 months ago. And you said earlier on that, yes, we believe we're on track to meeting these prescripted housing targets. But is there a sense that if we didn't necessarily want to meet the overall unit counts that are being currently prescribed, that there might be some flexibility?
Through you, Madam Chair, just clarification, Councillor, when you say the province backing off, do you mean some of the green belt developments that were going to occur? So to me, and through you, Madam Chair, what that signifies is that, I'm not seeing a reversal of the wording around, again, more housing options, more growth numbers. They're not slowing down. I mentioned to you the last quarters of last year were the highest population increases that have been seen in quite some time. So I don't see a backing off of growth. What I see actually is an added emphasis that municipalities need to take a hard look at their existing urban areas and look at those for opportunities to accommodate growth. And, we keep throwing around a planning horizon 2051 because, well, that's a target that's chosen, a 30-year planning horizon at the provincial level. But, there's a responsibility, too, to look beyond that as well. Growth isn't just we're going to get to 2051 and everything stops. At least I don't think so. So we have to consider that. But again, added emphasis on utilizing existing urban areas more so, because what the province is demonstrating is they don't want to see anything leaking out into adjacent protected rural areas. So that's my take on the backing off. So, is meeting targets, there's necessarily no planning jail associated with meeting targets or not meeting targets. However, we also have been seeing a little bit more direction from the province when we talk about, infrastructure costs. Councillor Russell, you brought that up earlier, and how that's being tied in. We're starting to see more potential opportunities to fund infrastructure improvements based on what kind of growth municipalities are seeing, what the trends are. So I expect that to continue as well. So something else to be considered in this whole equation. But again, the minimum growth forecasts or targets have been identified, and that's what we're utilizing with an eye on the extended future to try to strategically and responsibly make sure that existing land is utilized.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question, Madam Chair. I have 2 more questions, actually, if that's allowed.
You've only had one, so you're good.
Okay, good. Thanks. Do we see a lot of work required to update the zoning bylaw as this draft official plan is, to update it to conform with our updated official plan?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, not really. I think they're going to be relatively minor changes again. We did go through our zoning update not all that long ago, and that was in the midst of some of these provincial policy changes as well, so we did our best at the time to kind of work it into that process. There's going to be some, but again, probably more minor variety. We'll establish those, but nothing too significant that I envision.
Okay, that's good to hear. Okay, and one more question, Madam Chair. What plans do we have for creating a secondary plan for the BDSS site?
Through you, Madam Chair, and perhaps I'll turn it over to our CAO to provide some more commentary, but it's definitely something that's been top of mind as we consider that site. Again, I think there's a bunch of moving pieces with it that we're currently in the midst of, but if it's a secondary plan process, if it's a little bit more of an iterative master plan process, there's a bunch of different planning tools that we could utilize based on what the outcome of that is, which I don't exactly know yet what will come of that. But it is something that we're definitely prepared to undertake as needed. But I don't know if our CAO has any additional comments he wants to make.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I could, just to Councillor Bima, I think the director is correct. We're exploring a number of different options, whether it's a secondary planning or more of a visioning and master planning exercise that takes on a similar approach. Engagement will be at the core of what we do, and a plan that looks at the site, looks at the opportunities, and overlays financial sustainability and what we can afford to do will also drive our plans moving forward, Councillor. So, I want to say it's as simple as doing a secondary plan, but it's not, because there are financial considerations. There's currently analysis underway. as directed by council, that looks at the financial feasibility. So all those inputs will need to weigh into what we do, and we'll be back in front of council outlining what the exact process is. But let me reassure council, it will have significant public engagement.
So is there a need to address that within this draft official plan to some extent? Our intent moving forward with the site?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that's a larger question too, Councillor, because I've asked myself the very same question, not only about that, but again, we already know there's other changes, further changes to significant provincial policy coming down the line. You know, the provincial policy statement stands to be overhauled. It was supposed to happen in the fall of last year, hasn't yet. We don't know when that's going to happen. It's kind of one of those things where, you know, you have to kind of pick a spot and make sure that you're doing your fulsome review and update, knowing that there could be some potential for additional updates at a later date. I think that's where we're at with the BDS site as well, because we don't quite know yet exactly how it's going to all shake out. As the CAO mentioned, we're in a lot of those investigative parts of the whole process. So a little bit premature. But again, we wanted to address this update now, largely because it's being driven by the regional official plan, and there is a time, generally speaking, a time requirement of a year where we've got to look at conformity. So we're trying to tackle as much as we can now, and then knowing that there likely will be some further updates coming up in the next little while as well.
One thing you can count on is change.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Miklick, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Chair Murray. Through you to Matt. So the final thing I want to talk about is when I was reviewing the official plan and the changes, I noticed with regards to ag uses and diversified ag uses, there used to be some pretty detailed wording in those, in the criteria of what constitutes what. And when I read through it, I noticed like in basically entire pages, like, redacted or deleted. One of the things I hear from a lot of the people that both visit and both live in the area is that they appreciate the tourism sector and they appreciate the wineries and the types of wineries that we have here currently. And we compare ourselves to other municipalities and their wineries, and maybe ours are a little more intimate or a little more, mom and pop oriented, right? Like where you can actually see the owner. When we are eliminating all these different clauses that I've seen, are we putting at risk that character or that quality of operation or a farming operation by doing that?
Through you, Madam Chair. Really, a lot of those changes, so the policy framework, some of the stuff that you saw that was
Just, half pages.
yeah, was struck out. A lot of that was developed before the latest updates that the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs has issued when it comes to what permitted uses are in Ontario's rural areas. Now there's a lot more guidance in terms of what constitutes an on-farm diversified use. You saw that agritourism uses, for example, eliminated. Well, that's because now they're defined as an on-farm diversified use. So there's a little bit of consolidation of definitions that are based on that, based on the provincial policy statement that comes out of that. So we've updated the language to be consistent with that and more specifically refer that. That doesn't mean that there's going to be large and expansive types of on-farm diversified uses over and above what you see today. It really ties it into scale, which is in reference to the overall size of the land. We have some other additional provisions guiding that in our zoning bylaw in terms of size thresholds, percentage of lot coverage, contingent on the lands, and how those approaches to how those calculations get done, what gets included in that coverage and what doesn't. So again, it's all more of a reflection of an update that we've seen in the definitions and the provincial policy of OMAFRA and from just generally speaking the province on those matters. So you haven't, it's not a loss of any types of regulation or protection. It's more just a consolidation.
Thank you very much. And I think I just want to maintain that character that we currently have within our town, and that wine and craft beverage sector, that it doesn't become an overly commercialized sort of industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miklick. Mayor Easton?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. If I could just add something to Councillor Mikulic's comments. We just have to go back a bit and look at why the value-added policies were developed in the first place. We never expected when the Greenbelt came in that farmers would sit on their back porches and watch everybody else tromp all over their land. They have to make a living, and they have to make a good living. So what we've created is an opportunity for them to do that, and they're now in control of the full value chain, which is extremely valuable. Can that get inconvenience for their neighbors? Well, we have minimum distance setbacks and a lot of other things to protect it, but the idea is that we're not going to do anything to decrease the income that farmers can make now, because it's the only time in this community where they've really had the opportunity to do that. So anything else has to come, it's all normal farm practice. That's our position, and I don't see us changing that. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bruder, on page 12, you were talking about 96% of the growth coming in as a result of immigration. I want to go back to the question that Councillor Njima was asking, because we were talking, in that question, the focus was targets, and I know that you've used that word targets, but in fact, 96% due to immigration says to me that there's an issue here with the skilled workforce, and we need to do everything we can to keep our economy growing in Canada. So is this not also about market conditions that's driving what we're seeing here?
Through you, Madam Chair. Certainly is, Your Worship. It's actually kind of an amalgam of a bunch of different considerations, that being one of them. And as well, looking at you need that type of growth, but we're not seeing it organically at levels that were previously seen in years past. So there's definitely a variety of factors. But ultimately speaking, yeah, at the end of the day, we're going to continue to see that number around that same amount. So addressing the skilled labor force, for sure, is one of the things. I know a variety of operations are feeling that pinch, especially lately. So definitely something that's a primary factor.
Well, maybe, Madam Chair, we could somehow make that a little bit clearer in the documents so that it doesn't just become a numbers game. I mean, there's really the importance of having robust economies behind this as well. Matt, the whole idea of tourism and pickleball, because Ms. Elliott brought it up, and it's pretty, it is the trend, there's no question about it, but it's not letting up at all. What is your feeling about sports tourism? And should there be some further, maybe an expansion of some kind of ideas or an idea around partnerships in order to address some of the costs and the demand that's out there, the immediate demand for certain sports? What are your thoughts on that?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think it's definitely important. We've seen that, by virtue, and you'll see the report come a little later tonight, by virtue of some of changes such as Bill 23, we're not able to acquire lands for those types of things quite like we were. We're trying to utilize opportunity to revise some definitions to differentiate between what recreation might be in terms of more active sports fields, some indoor facilities, what have you, versus park space, to provide a little more flexibility in terms of making sure that we can maximize what we can obtain. But the use of partnerships and considering those opportunities to diversify in terms of risk and cost, I think are something that's going to become more and more prevalent, absolutely, for all municipalities, not just us.
Okay, that's great. And one of the really important pieces in this document, and I think the reading of it, the first reading is really, it's been quite a pleasure to go through this. It's very comprehensive. You've talked quite a bit about Ontario Street, and I think that from some of the comments that I'm reading that there are people that have quite an interest. There's actually more people in the room tonight, and you've probably heard from more people than in 2012. I was in the audience in 2014. There were 12 people in the room, and I don't think it grew to any more than 14. So this is really incredible to have this kind of interest and also to have the commentary from people. So where people have a keen interest in a particular area, and that's the beauty of these documents, they're so parsed out, you can actually go to something that you think is really important. Are you looking at the potential of having small roundtables in that situation? Where Ontario Street is concerned, is it possible to have visuals? I must say that in one of the most recent publications of the town, on the back page, there's a picture there of the old fairgrounds property and what it looks like now. And it is really a beautiful picture because it's the real thing. And if we could have had something like that back when it was built, I think there wouldn't have been so much opposition. But we just don't seem to be able to get the right pictures. There are always renderings that never quite make it into the reality. And we also know that some of these plans change over time. They do change over time as market conditions change. So what can we do with the technology that's coming our way now to make this easier for all of us, not just the people that we represent, but everybody, so that we can understand more completely what it is that's actually going to be built in these spaces?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's a timely question, Your Worship, because if you'll recall, we went through the whole visioning and streetscape master planning exercise, if we talk about Ontario Street specifically. And we developed a document with guiding and parameters on how development, how that corridor can evolve over time. The next step in that, if you'll recall, is to actually work on providing more of a visual, a demonstration plan of the corridor, even looking at certain specific properties of significance that were identified in that document and come up with a little bit more of a concept. And this isn't one where, it's absolutely bound that any development has to follow that exactly, but it shows some of the consistent elements. That's something we're actually working with the region right now on, with Caldoon, with their urban design team. They're very good at utilizing the technology that you speak of in order to come up with those types of graphics, because we know visuals are a very important way of conveying a message, especially with a document like that. So that's an example of where we're doing that. We expect to come before you with some of those visuals to obtain your input in the near future. We did a lot of consultation as part of that study as well, making sure that we got input from our community in terms of what they want to see there. So to your comment about roundtables, I don't know necessarily that we had specific stakeholder roundtables, but we did have group discussions in some of our public information centers, so that influenced that whole process as well. So we did it for that corridor. As you know, we're trying to look at initiating something similar in Victoria, or on Victoria and King in Vineland. That one's a little different because we've got the King Street project that the region has been working on for a while, so we need to incorporate that, but we're also looking at that area as well. So, and then we also have Prudhome's with a variety of visuals in the secondary plan as well that we've worked through. So we've done a lot of that work, but we'll be continuing to do so.
Okay, Madam Chair, I think one of the clear messages that I'm hearing from members of the public is that they really want to understand where the community is going, what the community will look like in the future, and what are the plans for that. And in some ways, I think you've done a very good job. It's starting to come through. It's becoming more of a personal document than previous ones that I've seen. And maybe that's something that we could keep in mind as it's formulating and being reworked. I think that would be very valuable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor Easton. Councillor Ringima, you've been up twice. Can I ask you to be quick for your third round, please?
Yes, I just have one question, and thank you, Madam Chair. And it's through an email that came in from a resident, and they're here tonight, and I know I didn't see a response. I know you're going to respond to them, but I thought I'd ask the question while we're here. In section 1.3.2, page 15 of the draft document, the word small is taken out of the phrase small town character. So I wonder if you can speak to that. I kind of understand it. I looked up sort of a definition of town, Wikipedia, wherever, and I kind of get where you're going, but I'm wondering if you can respond to that.
Sure, and through you, Madam Chair. You're right, we did look at that, and I understand why the question's been asked too. I know that, there's significant interest in preserving character of the community, but when you use the word small town, and you use it in light of some of the forecasted growth that we know is going to be coming over the years, to me, and it's actually been utilized in conversations with me personally from a variety of residents and stakeholders to guide, well, that means how many people are going to be in the town, and I'm like, well, no, not necessarily. So the position of staff was, in considering the growth that we know is coming, we felt that it was a little bit misleading to have the word small in there, because ultimately speaking, is the town really going to be small? Instead, what we wanted to do was focused on, we maintain a lot of the verbiage about preserving character. We just got rid of that word in anticipation of the growth that we already know is going to happen. We actually see it in the housing stock and the housing pipeline now, in terms of the change that's coming over the next number of years. I know it won't come tomorrow, but it is happening. So that's really the driving force behind it, why we made that revision. But we are open to looking at some language further in terms of character defining and some further inclusions that we could add in, because I do understand that it's a significant point of interest. But hopefully that gives you the background of where our standpoint was from anyway.
I think there's going to be possibly further questions about that. And yeah, I mean, the focus has to be on being clear what we want this town to look like. Whether it is a quote-unquote small town is another question, or whether it's going to be in the long run is another question. Will there be a definition within the official plan of town?
Through you, Madam Chair, probably not, but instead I think we would try to, if anything, we can reevaluate how we look at character, again, through the confines of what we have to consider from a overarching policy standpoint. But the definition of a town, I mean, we can include something, but I'm not sure that lends itself to addressing what there will be further questions on, to your point. So I think that would be more of a generalized definition of what a town is. I'm not sure it would address the whole character situation, but something we can look at.
And I ask that only because, really, I mean, we out and out say in there protection of the town character. So I'm wondering if we need to define
I see.
what town character is.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay,
Yep.
thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I see that our CAO would like to chime in. Mike, please go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor, I think this is a good question. And I think when you look at towns, and staff have kind of bandied this around back and forth, you've got the town of Oakville, which is larger than the city of Burlington at nearly 200,000 people. So oftentimes when towns use small town or they talk about character, it has nothing to do with head counts or population, but everything to do with characteristics, like a slower pace of life, like family-oriented events, like walkability, like proximity to nature, and an authenticity, I think, in a lot of ways that's probably not evident in larger places. And so I think if those are the definitions we're talking about, and I can assure you I talked to a number of residents like you do, and we often have this conversation on what is a town, what is a city. The city of Port Colborne at 17,000 people made that decision. I think historically, there's been definitions on when you reach a certain threshold, you change from a town to a city, but that is no longer applicable in legislation. But rather, again, I'll go back to, it's not about head counts. It's not about how many people. We can increase our size and still maintain that characteristic that I think we've all grown to love and that we all value in terms of what Lincoln is and what Lincoln has to offer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, CAO. Mayor Easton, you're next in the queue.
Madam Chair, I'll be very quick. I just wanted to make reference to a sense of place because it was my understanding that a permanent small town and the intransigent nature of our previous official plan refusing to really address issues of growth is what got the holdup in the first place. So a sense of place is certainly a way to describe people's perceptions of distinguishing qualities. And this is what I always hear people talking about, the attributes of the environment, the way families are respected, the way families have a priority in the community. It shapes positive feelings and attachments, and it can really have a big impact on mental health. So I would really provide guidance, and I hope that council can provide leadership in this regard, because I think it is more authentic. It is more specific than an emotional definition of a small town. We know what that feels like, but I think in today's terms, it's really more describing a sense of place, because it can be done very, very objectively, which I think is extremely important. Thank you.
Seeing no more in the queue, last call. All right, thank you very much. There being no further questions, I have a motion moved by Councillor Reimer to receive and file Report PD-01-24 regarding the official plan review by the Town of Lincoln, and that a recommendation report be prepared once all comments have been received and any identified issues have been addressed. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. And I'll close that vote, and that motion carries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Devan. We are now considering the consent agenda portion of our meeting, inclusive of the Housing Select Committee minutes of September 12, 2023, Museum Advisory Committee minutes of October 19, 2023, Housing Select Committee minutes of November 20, 2023. Would any member of committee like to remove an item from the consent agenda to discuss? There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Mikulik that all items listed under the heading of consent agenda from Monday, January 15, 2024, be adopted as recommended. Housing Select Committee minutes of September 12, 2023, Museum Advisory Committee minutes of October 19, 2023, Housing Select Committee minutes of November 20, 2023. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to please open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. And I'll close that vote, and that motion carries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We are now at the Planning and Economic Development portion of our agenda. We have no delegations, but we do have a report. We will now consider Report PD-02-24, Parkland Dedication and Cash in Lieu, Official Plan Amendment and Bylaw. Do members of committee have any questions regarding this report? There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Russell to approve the draft bylaw and repeal bylaw number 96-81 as amended, being a bylaw requiring land or cash in lieu thereof for park or other public recreational purposes as a condition of consent and as a condition of development or redevelopment of land, and adopt a new parkland dedication bylaw attached hereto as Appendix A of Report PD-02-24. Enact and pass the official plan amendment attached as Appendix B of Report PD-02-24 to amend the official plan policies in relation to parkland dedication, and committee declare that they have considered all of the written and oral submissions and agree to the planning report analysis and recommendations, and find that the official plan amendment meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Region official plan, and the town official plan. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now open. And I'll go ahead and close that vote, and that motion carries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Number 8 on our agenda is confidential items. We have no confidential items. And number 9 is committee remarks. Are there any remarks from committee members? There being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned at 7:49 p.m.